Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the Diversion Authority Finance Committee meeting for September 30th. We'll begin by a call to order, and then roll call, please. Peggy, could you help me with that?
Yes, Mayor Darvis,
Present.
Dr. Mahoney, Mr. Peterson, Mr. Hendrickson,
Here.
Mr. Jacobson,
Here.
Mr. Costin,
Here.
Ms. Johnson, Mr. Montplaisir,
Here.
Mr. Redlinger,
Here.
Mr. Steen,
Here.
Mr. Garrick,
Here.
Ms. McCall.
Here.
Have a quorum.
Thank you, Peggy. Next order of business is to approve the minutes from the previous meeting. It is attached and has been distributed. Are there any additions or questions to the minutes as distributed?
Steen moves to approve.
Thank you. Is there a second, please? Commissioner Hendrickson seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 3 is the approval of the bills. Mr. Costin, please.
Yeah, the bills listing is much like we've seen in the past. Legal services is a primary bills, along with the Cass County Joint Water District for $6.1 million. So total bills to be approved, $6,604,359. There doesn't appear to be anything unusual in the bills list.
Are there any additional questions for Mr. Costin from any of our commissioners? Mr.
Steen moves to approve payment of the bills.
Thank you, sir. I have a motion. Is there a second, please?
Redlinger, second.
Thank you, Mike. It's been moved and seconded to approve the bills as presented by Mr. Costin. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 4 is a financial report. Well, again, we call on Mr. Costin.
Thank you, Chair, for the report through the month ending August 31st. The current year spend is $39,544,196 and a cumulative project to date spend of $574,221,716. And if you look at that component of spend, obviously land acquisitions is the highest priority at this point, and that consumes a good share of that spending. With regard to the subsequent budget, both revenue and expenses are under budget comfortably. And with regard to our position, our cash position through August 31st is $89,196,901. All the reports are included that are typically included, and have any other comments with regard to what's attached.
Thank you, Mr. Costin. Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Costin with regard to the finances? All right, it's your pleasure, Mr.
Steen moves to approve the financial report.
Thank you, Commissioner Steen. Is there a second, please? Thank you, Commissioner Peterson. Been moved and seconded to approve the financial report through August 31st. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Item number 5 is the Executive Director Financial Report. Joel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In front of you here, up on the screens, you can see just a rundown of some of the information Mr. Costin just went over. I won't go over it in detail. I just want to highlight a few areas. As Mr. Costin had mentioned, we're running comfortably under budget for the year. The annual cash budget was 138 million. We're currently tracking at 48 million. I'll give reasoning for that in a second. As you can see, the P3 support services still running on budget. We expect that to come in right on par. And then the other large item is the lands and impacted property mitigation. Our budget was 71 million. We've currently expended 26. Some of the reasoning for that is, failure to come to consensus negotiation on land necessary for the diversion channel. And so those could escalate at any time given our ability to negotiate on those properties. So they are properties that we will need to acquire prior to the P3 construction, which would occur hopefully mid to third quarter next year. So those are costs that we will be incurring very shortly. The other item you can see, engineering, legal, and financial, again, coming in on budget. Actually, it will probably come in a little bit lower than budget, so for the year. On the second page here, I have just kind of digging down into some of the specific projects. A majority of the projects that we have ongoing right now are all on budget, no significant concerns. I did want to highlight on this page, on the middle of this page, the in-town flood protection. So this is another area where we are running significantly under budget. A lot of this hinged on Fargo's ability to bid out projects this year, contingent upon land purchases. So I have talked with Nathan Borboom, and they have been making some pretty significant progress on property acquisitions. So majority of these projects that were planned for this year will be transferred to the next year's budget. And so I don't anticipate that we'll expend the in-town flood protection budget. So just wanted to give some rationale as to why we're comfortably under budget. And I'll be willing to take any questions at this time.
Questions for Mr. Paulson? Next order of business is the Diversion Authority Board approval contract actions. Mr. Paulson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a number of actions for the Finance Committee to consider for recommendation to the board today. I think, Mr. Chair, it might be easiest if I go through each one of these and then we can take a vote on all of them if there's no questions.
That'd be just fine. Thank you.
Okay. The first one is a Master Service Agreement amendment for Beaver Creek Archaeology. All this is a schedule increase on their MSA, so it's a zero cost budget impact. The second is a property structure mitigation bid that we received, and they were Schmidt and Sons Construction was the low bid at $313,000. The next one is also a project that was bid, the Oxbow Hickson Baki wetland mitigation. Industrial Builders was the low bid at $2.3 million. And then we also have the utility relocation agreement for the Wild Rice River control structure. That's with Cass County Electric Co-op to move some of their services for the core project. And that's in the amount of $44,500. And then we also have Task Order 30 Amendment 5 for property structure mitigation. And that is an engineering agreement with Houston Moore Group for $220,000 related to an additional or related to the property structure mitigation bid that you can see above. And the final one is the preliminary engineering agreement with BNSF. And this is our attempt to work with BNSF to come to agreement on the bridges that cross the diversion channel. And so we need to provide resources to BNSF to review the P3 bids and come to agreement on the anticipated designs that are submitted. So this is kicking off a new service agreement with them for $60,000. And that's all, Mr. Chair, and I'll take any questions if there are.
Are there any questions of Mr. Paulson? We'll start with Commissioner Hendrickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joel, when you said utility relocation agreement for the Wild Rice River structure, what kind of services are you talking about there?
Thank you, Councilmember Hendrickson. So that is for electric services that run adjacent to the township road. That's adjacent to the Wild Rice Control Structure project. The core project actually crosses that township road and crosses the electric line that parallels the township road. So this would be to remove that line along the township road and reroute it around the Wild Rice Control Structure project.
I was just curious, so thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Additional questions? Mr. Steen?
Mr. Paulson, just a quick question on the Houston Moore Group. And we have like a general task order or a significant contract with them. Does this fall under that contract? That's a multi-year contract. And do we ever compare where we're at with the amendments to what the original contract is?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Steen. So we do keep track of all that. Mr. Bachegard and myself review all of these task orders and the scopes associated with that. This is related to task order 30, which is a property structure mitigation task order. When it was run through the board the first time, the task order was for the first specific property structure mitigation project. And so this is, I think, we've had multiple property structure mitigation projects since then. Each one, Houston Moore Group has run a task order amendment for that specific project. As it relates to the total program budget and what we've anticipated, these are all contained within the program budget and still under the anticipated amount that we have in our estimate. I have had discussions with HMG about how we work the HMG task orders, and it is a little bit different than the other consultant task orders in that it's all project specific, where some of our other consultants are more program focused. And so every new project that comes along, they don't have to come with an amendment. So for right now, it seems to be working out okay for us. But that is something that we track in relation to the program budget that we have inputted for the specific engineering costs related to the mitigation projects.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Mr. Costin?
I had a question with regard to the concept of wetland mitigation, and this is more of kind of an educational comment perhaps, but it's for the Oxbow, Hicks, and Bakke levy at $2.3 million. Can you give a one-sentence rendition of why we have to do that, and what's the magnitude of wetlands mitigation in relationship to the entire diversion project?
Thank you, Mr. Costin. Those are good questions. My one sentence would be because we have to. So it's a regulatory requirement by the Corps of Engineers under federal environmental law that we have to mitigate for our impacts to the defined wetland footprint of the project. We're also doing another wetland mitigation project that's being proposed in the Camel Hump area, the Drain 27 wetland project. That project really will encompass all of the southern embankment components on the North Dakota side. And that, I believe, is about 300 acres or so. And then we'll still be responsible for mitigating for the wetlands impacted due to the channel construction. And those mitigation projects are considered to be the Drayton Dam. If we hear about the Drayton Dam once in a while, we hear about the Otter Tail River on the Minnesota side for the Minnesota environmental impacts. And then we've also have some oxbow restorations in the city of Horace that we're looking at doing. And so it's difficult to find opportunities to gain mitigation credits to cover our impacts under the wetland environmental law. But the big one, the next big one will be this Drain 27 project that will take care of a good chunk of our responsibilities.
Thank you.
Additional questions from Mr. Paulson? Do any of our call-in members have any questions? Okay, hearing none. I'd ask for the board's approval that we consider all 6 of these items at one time. Does that meet with your approval?
Jacobson makes a motion to approve.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, Dan. Moved and seconded that we could take all these actions at one time. I'm going to call for a roll call vote, please, Peggy, on items 1 through 6 under the Diversion Authority Board Approval Contract Actions.
Mayor Dardis,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson,
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson,
Yes.
Mr. Costin,
Yes.
Mr. Montplaisir,
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger,
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney. Yes. Ms. Johnson,
This is Commissioner Haney filling in for Miss Johnson. Yes.
Mr. Steen,
Yes.
Mr. Gehrig,
Yes.
Ms. McCall.
yes,
Thank you, Peggy. Next order of business is the Executive Director's approved contract actions. Joel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had 3 contracting actions that went on my desk this month. The first one was for material testing services for work package 43, 28, and 50. And that was a budget amendment for $38,000 for Braun Intertech. The second was a task order 1, amendment 8 for cultural resource investigation for Beaver Creek archaeology. That was for $84,000. And the last one was a Southern Embankment and Associated Infrastructure Design Services for Houston Ware Group for $145,000. And I'll take any questions if there are any related to those items.
Questions, Mr. Paulson? All right. This is for information only to our board, that real actions will be taken by the Diversion Authority full board. Is that not correct?
So, Mr. Chair, these items, according to the JPA, any amendments under 150,000 can be approved directly by the executive director and does not need to go to the board.
Very good.
But it is customary to report these out to the finance and to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. That concludes your approved contracts.
That's correct,
Report.
sir.
All right, item number 7 is other business. A draft 2021 program budget. Mr. Paulson.
Thank you, sir. I had one additional, I apologize, one additional item to report out, and that was a task order 4 for appraisals of environmental monitoring easements that the Cass County Joint Water Resource District approved for $228,000. So I'll take any questions on that before I get into the 2021 cash budget.
Questions for Mr. Paulson? Thank you. Again, moving on to item number 7.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in your packets, I did submit the draft 2021 cash budget. Just a few things for discussion as we go through. The total budget, cash budget that we've proposed for consideration is $184 million. For comparison, our cash budget in 19 was $162 million, and our cash budget in 2020 was $138 million. A few items to note here. I transferred those in-town flood protection projects from this year's cash budget over to the 2021 cash budget. A majority of our costs are going to be contained again within land acquisition and mitigation at $70 million for next year. And then we have we're anticipating our costs to start to expend on the diversion channel and associated infrastructure. And that's related to the P3 procurement and the beginning of construction on the diversion channel. And we have approximately $56 million allocated in the cash budget for next year for those services. So obviously that's contingent upon a valid and an agreed upon contract with the P3 developer, but we do anticipate that to happen in early 2021. So at this point, this is just for consideration of the Finance Committee. It is a requirement of in the JPA for the Executive Director to submit in October the draft 2021 budget, and this will be considered for approval at next month's meeting, or if it's not ready then, by the end of the year, by the December meeting. So I just asked the committee to review and notify me of any questions, comments, or concerns in preparation for a discussion at next month's Finance Committee meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. Any questions as of today?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Steen?
And, Joel, just a quick question on the debt service. What's changed from prior years in the budget? Was it, the budget was 11 million, now it's 5 million. Our debt service cost is going to be significantly less than budget this year as well. So what's changed?
It's a good question. I'm going to have to rely on my staff to answer that for you, Commissioner Steen. I think Mr. Shockley or Mr. Barthel, either one of you guys. I think I know the answer, but I don't want to tell you.
I
the
might
wrong
too,
thing.
but I want to make sure.
Go ahead. So, it's a very good question. We're looking at reducing the debt and the payoff of that. And so the financing of that, we've been carrying along as we've gone. And so, as we continue on, that debt, we're reducing that so that you're going to see an overall reduction that way. That's the broad picture. We can get into more of the details.
Would that be the pay down with the WIFIA loan? Is that the thought process there? I mean, I know it's been discussed to take that because you don't pay the interest cost until sometime later. Is that part of this?
That is part of it. Some of the increased costs that you've seen this year are due to the WIFIA loan and the financing for that, the reviews of that. So with the WIFIA loan in place, that does help reduce our costs.
And just to follow up on that, if I may, then, and so I understand that for 20, and so for 19, the reduction was from 11 to 5. We didn't really have the WIFIA loan in 19, and we didn't really pay down any debt in 19, did we? Or did we take out 100 million? Mike might know that.
We have our debt that both the city and the county have,
Right.
interest rates have fallen.
That much, okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you,
Any
Paul.
additional questions on the 2021 program budget? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Paulson. Our next order of business is a WIFIA update. We'll call on Mr. Shockley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We continue to move towards closing. Currently, it's looking like we're about 60 days away from closing. We have finished our due diligence period with WIFIA, and they are just finishing up some items regarding the underwriting of the loan, and we should hear back soon with a term sheet that would prescribe the interest rate and when we can anticipate to close. I can certainly answer any questions, but we're just finalizing due diligence, and we've engaged a second ratings agency also.
Commissioner Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Shockley, is there anything that would get in the way of us missing out on this opportunity? Meaning, obviously we have some potential tumult that could happen in Washington, D.C., and I've asked this question a bit before, but now we're further down the road. So is there anything that could interrupt this or cause this to be delayed?
So, a great question. Once the term sheet is issued, that means it's received approval from EPA leadership. The only final stage then is to finalize the term sheet. So that means the diversion authority signs off on the term sheet. It's very much like we've went through the underwriting process at a mortgage company. They give us the final interest rate. You have to sign on the bottom that you're ready to proceed to closing. We would finalize the master indenture of trust and the other documents, get final approvals on that. It does need to go through Office of OMB for final approval, but they've already been briefed. Leadership at the EPA goes to OMB, gets their pre-approval before they send us the term sheet. You know, I don't ever want to say it's nothing can happen, but we are in the final phases of getting the final closing, and EPA very much wants to close it this fiscal year.
So it's not a no necessarily, but it's 95%, 99%?
I would say 99%. We're right on track where we're supposed to be. Once the big issue is once you receive your term sheet, that's the most important portion of the loan process, because that means it's been vetted through all the leadership and the approval process. And then it's just making sure that if anybody had serious objections to the term sheet, they would have noted them in this due diligence process.
Okay.
And so then it really becomes, it's within the control of the diversion authority. I suppose the diversion authority could say, no, we don't want the loan, but.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Any additional questions for Mr. Shockley? Thank you. Next order of business is a report from the Land Acquisition Directive for the Red River Control Structure. Mr. Dodds.
Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for having me this afternoon. In your packet, there are 3 separate land acquisition directives. If you'd like, I can take them one at a time or roll through all 3.
One at a time,
Okay.
please.
So the first one in your packet, correct me, which one is the first one in the packet? I apologize.
Red River Control Structure.
Sure. So there are actually 2 LADs for the Red River Control Structure. One is for parcels on the North Dakota side and one is for parcels on the Minnesota side. All of these land acquisition directives are sort of procedural in nature. We do get a request from the designer, which in this case happens to be the Corps of Engineers. They identify which parcels are impacted and which property rights we need. We have a budget assigned for all of the impacted parcels. We develop that budget, present it to the committee, make sure there's awareness that we are going to start the acquisition of those parcels. Assuming the committee signs off on this, we give the directive to the acquiring agency, which on the North Dakota side is the Cass County Joint Board, and on the Minnesota side is the MCCJPA. So the LAD in front of you for North Dakota parcels impacted by the Red River Control Structure. You can see a map in your packet there that highlights in sort of a peach salmon color the parcels that are incorporated in this LAD. I would point out that we have been working with some of these property owners already. As we went to produce this LAD, we found that we had a little bit of cleanup work to do, and so there's a few parcels in here, I apologize, that we've been working on, but nonetheless wanted to capture them in this LAD. And then there's a few new parcels on the north end and south end of where the structure is located that we have not been working with yet, but we'll be working with them shortly. So would ask for your approval of that.
Questions for Mr. Dodds on attachment 5.0, Red River Control Structure? Hearing none. I'd like a motion each of these items separately, please. Do I hear a motion?
Montplaisir, move to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Montplaisir. It's been moved. Is there a second, please?
Second, Costin. Second.
Mr. Costin seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the Land Acquisition Directive for the Red River Control Structure, attachment 5.0. Peggy, would you please take the roll?
Mayor Dardis,
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney, Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson,
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson,
Yes.
Mr. Costin,
Yes.
Mr. Haney,
Yes.
Mr. Montplaisir,
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger,
Yes.
Mr. Steen,
Yes.
Mr. Garrick,
Yes.
Ms. McCall.
yes,
Motion approved.
Thank you, Peggy. Next order of business is the Land Acquisition Directive for the Red River Control Structure, Attachment 6.0, the Minnesota side. Mr. Dodds.
Yes, in your packet then is the LAD Minnesota 001 Revision 3. This identifies 2 parcels on the Minnesota side that are impacted by the Red River Control Structure. Again, you can see a map identifying those parcels that are impacted. This directive would direct the MCCJPA to proceed with the acquisition of properties, the property rights on those 2 properties. Ask for your approval.
Question for Mr. Dodds? Hearing none, we'd entertain a motion.
I move to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Hendrickson. Is there a second, please?
Montplaisir, second.
Thank you, Mr. Montplaisir. Been moved and seconded to approve the Land Acquisition Directive for the Red River Control Structure, Attachment 6.0 for the Minnesota side. Is there any further discussion? Excuse me, we're going to go to a roll call vote again. My apologies. Peggy, would you please call a roll?
Mayor Dardis,
Yes?
Dr. Mahoney, Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson,
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson,
Yes.
Mr. Costin,
Yes.
Mr. Haney,
Yes.
Mr. Montplaisir,
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger,
Yes.
Mr. Steen,
Yes.
Mr. Gehrig,
Yes.
Ms. McCall.
yes,
Thank you, Peggy. Next order of business is the Land Acquisition Directive for Drain 27, Wetland Mitigation, Attachment 7.0. Mr. Dodds.
Thank you, sir. In your packet is a land acquisition directive. This is a revision. Last month, we did bring forward the land acquisition directive for the wetland project, Drain 27 wetland project. And since that time, we have visited with a few property owners in the area, and we have determined that there are some additional properties that people are asking if we might be willing to buy earlier. All of these properties will ultimately be needed for the project. It just happens that the Drain 27 project is accelerating when we originally thought we would be approaching them. And so because of that request, we have updated or revised the LAD, and we would ask for your approval of this revision.
Thank you, Mr. Dodds. Any questions for Mr. Dodds? May I have a motion, please?
Move to approve, Costin.
Steen, second.
Thank you, Mr. Costin. Thank you, Mr. Steen. It's been moved and seconded to approve the Land Acquisition Directive for Drain 27 for the Wetland Mitigation Attachment 7.0. Is there any discussion? We'll go to a roll call vote. Peggy, please.
Mayor Dardis,
Yes?
Dr. Mahoney, Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson,
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson,
Yes.
Mr. Costin,
Yes.
Mr. Haney,
Yes.
Mr. Montplaisir,
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger,
Yes.
Mr. Steen,
Yes.
Mr. Gehrig,
Yes.
Ms. McCall.
Ms. McCall. Yes,
Thank you, Peggy. Motion passes. Does anybody on the Finance Committee have anything else for this meeting like to bring forward? Our next meeting will be October 21st. I remind you of that. There'll be notifications sent out. Is there anything else? With that, we stand adjourned. Thank you.